When you think about the future of our planet, whose voice would you imagine shaping the decisions? Is it the diplomats in their conference rooms only, the negotiator, the expert, the scientists, or could it also be us young people when we represent 60% of the African continent and our future is at stake? Today, on the International Youth Day, I'm taking you behind the scenes of one of the most important gatherings of Africa's environmental future, the 20th session of the African Ministerial Conference on the Environment, or AMCEN-20, which marks 4 decades of environmental action in Africa. My name is Nancy, and you are listening to the Tanora Revolution podcast. I'll share what it's like to be part of the AWF-Wall Policy Fellowship, a program by AWF and UNEP that equips us, young African conservationists, to step confidently and boldly into spaces where global biodiversity policy is decided. But before we dive into my AMCEN-20 experience, let me share with you first the organization that brought me there, African Wildlife Foundation. So African Wildlife Foundation is an Africa-based global conservation organization protecting wildlife and their habitats as essential parts of the modern and prosperous Africa. So their youth engagement strategy was developed into fellowship programs that give young people hands-on experience in conservation science, policy making, and management to support youth seeking careers in conservation. So the AWF-Wall Youth Leadership Program offers 2 fellowship programs, one focusing on international environmental governance and the other one on conservation management. So let's talk about the AWF-Wall Policy Fellowship. So this fellowship is 9-month hybrid program to establish a pool of young African professionals with training and hands-on experience in international biodiversity governance. And the program was launched in March 2021 in partnership with UNEP, or United Nations Environment Program. And the inaugural cohort graduated 70 fellows in 2022. So it was 3 years ago. Fellows will graduate with skills they need to contribute to policy formulation and review processes at country, regional, and international levels. So there are four elements of the program to prepare us fellows to become hands-on experts in policy and negotiation skills. First, we have the workshops. So the program features 2 virtual workshops. We have 4 modules. We have modules on the foundation on conservation. We also have a module to understand how the world protects the environment and how the world makes decisions. And then we have the in-person negotiation simulation. It's a 1-week in-person workshop in Kenya, Nairobi. And during our simulation, it was just before the AMCEN-20, we were part of negotiations, a simulated CBD COP16 with different working groups negotiating, and I was the delegate for Madagascar in that simulation, and we focused on the other effective area-based conservation measures, or OSCMs, which is essential to achieve target 30 by 30 of the KMGBF, or the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And we identified OSCMs. We were thinking about how to finance them, the rights of IPLCs, and how to monitor the OSCMs. So it was really a simulation on how the COPs are going into the context of our respective countries and continent. We also have like the SADC region as well, the East African communities as well. So when we were done with the negotiation simulation during our week in Kenya, we also had the policy making conferences. So during the policy-making conferences, we participate in conventions and conferences related to the international environmental governance. We are particular focus on the Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD, and it's the world's largest biodiversity convention. So for me, I attended AMCEN-20 from the in July. Some other fellows attended the Ramsar COP15 on wetlands from 23 to 31 July 2025. Some of us will attend IUCN World Conservation Congress in Abu Dhabi in October, and the other fellows will join the UN Environment Assembly in Kenya, or UNEA. And then after that, we also had an online module on strategic communication, on how important is it to use our social media to increase our impact. And then we also have the policy briefs, where we'll be writing and publishing policy briefs on environmental issues that we care about. So stay tuned as well, because I will definitely publish that with the support of AWF. And then the networking opportunities. I met wonderful and inspiring leaders during my conference, and even during the in-person workshop. So please stay tuned as well. It will be part of this episode. All right, so now that you have an overview of the AWF-Wall Policy Fellowship, let's talk about my experience at AMCEN-20. So AMCEN-20 is the 20th session of the African Ministerial Conference on Environment. And yes, before that, I also had prior experience in policy process. I attended UNCCD COP16 in Saudi Arabia, for example, as part of the UNCCD Youth Caucus. And I also attended the 70th ordinary session of the NGOs Forum, or the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, ACHPR, in Tanzania in 2023. So let's talk about AMCEN-20. Let's understand the scope of the work of this convention. So the African Ministerial Conference on the Environment was established in Cairo, Egypt in December 1985, and it followed the adoption of the Cairo Program for African Cooperation. If you would like to read that, I will add the link in the description. And all 54 African Union member states are full members of the conference. So AMCEN's core mandates are to champion environmental protection, promote sustainable development that meets basic human needs, advance social and economic progress at all levels, and support food security through sustainable agricultural practices as well. So the 12th session was hosted by the government of Libya at the headquarters of the UN, the Environment Program, or UNEP, in Nairobi, Kenya. And it was held from the 14th to 18th July 2025, and commemorated the 40th anniversary of the conference, marked by the launch of the AMCEN-20 report. I will also add the link there if you're interested. And let's talk about that report, because it has been the 40 years of AMCEN. And the report showcased key achievement in policy harmonization. Why? Because AMCEN is where ministers, African ministers and experts cover at the same place, and it happens around every 2 years for ordinary session. But of course there are special sessions to have the common positions of Africa during global environmental conferences. So the part from the policy harmonization, from the report, you also see capacity building and regional cooperation. And of course, it reaffirms AMCEN's continued roles as Africa's leading platform for environmental diplomacy and action. And the 20th session focused on shaping Africa's unified voice in global environmental fora. So we just had, for example, the COP15 on Ramsar, on wetlands in Zimbabwe. So it was also the common position of Africa was discussed during AMCEN. We also had the 47 meeting of the party to the Montreal Protocol, and the Montreal Protocol is on substances that deplete the ozone layer, to be Nairobi, Kenya as well. We also have the COP6 to the Minamata Convention. It's a convention on mercury, and it was in Geneva, Switzerland, because by the time I'm sharing this, it passed as well. We also have the UNFCCC COP30 on climate change in Brazil, that is happening later this year. We also have CITES COP20, the Conference of Parties to the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, that will happen in Uzbekistan. And then the UNEA 7, that some of our fellows will attend as well. So when I attended the COP, when I attended AMCEN-20, I gained a deeper understanding on how the conference frames Africa's priorities since 1985 with global sustainability discourses, and my focus areas, particularly on biodiversity and desertification. Yeah, I'll share more during the COP decisions, the AMCEN decisions. So let's talk about the governance structure of AMCEN. Let's dive into how it is structured. So AMCEN is supported by a bureau and technical secretariat that facilitate coordination and implementation. So the UNEP, through its regional office for Africa, serves as a secretariat of AMCEN. And UNEP provides institutional, technical, but also logistical support to the conference and facilitates coordination with member states and partners. UNEP also manages the AMCEN Trust Fund and ensures continuity between sessions. So the continuity between this AMCEN-20 and next AMCEN-21. And they, of course, don't work alone. They also work with AMCEN Bureau to implement decisions. I will share more about the decisions during this AMCEN. There was 11 decisions. And we also work with the Bureau to mobilize resources. As we shared, there is this AMCEN Trust Fund, and to also strengthen Africa's engagement in regional and global environmental processes. So the Bureau is an elected body of 5 ministers, each one from each African sub-region, and they're tasked with overseeing the implementation of AMCEN decisions and coordinating activities between sessions. Because, yes, when the decisions are done, it's important to see the implementation. So that's why the Bureau is there. So for the AMCEN-20, delegates elected Ibrahim Munir is the Minister of Environment of Libya as President of AMCEN-20. And apart from Libya as the President, we have the representative for the North Africa. As I told you that the Bureau has a representative for the sub-regions of Africa. So for North Africa, we have DRC. For Central Africa, we have South Sudan. For East Africa, we have Namibia. Namibia for Southern Africa, and Ghana for West Africa. Sorry, there was let me say it again. So Libya for the North Africa, DRC for Central Africa, South Sudan for East Africa, and Namibia for Southern Africa, and of course Ghana for West Africa. And the AMCEN-19 president was Fitum Asefa, the Minister for Planning and Development of Ethiopia. So now that we understand the governance structure of AMCEN, let's explore the rules of procedure. So how are the rules of procedure established and followed? So the rules of procedure of AMCEN was based on both the United Nations rules of procedure and the practices of the African Union. So AMCEN's rules of procedure were formally adopted at its second session in 1987. It's the AMCEN-2 Decision 4, following AMCEN-1 Decision 8 on organization of regional cooperation in respect of environment and eco-development. And it also served as the framework for the conference operations and addressed various aspects of AMCEN's functioning, for example, like the code of sessions, the code of the conduct of a session, the decision-making processes, the role of its secretariat as well. And it holds ordinary sessions every 2 years, but of course there is special sessions, convent when urgency matters arise. And AMCEN is primarily funded through a trust fund. It was established in 1991 and supported by voluntary contributions from member states and development partners. The fund also helps finance the operation of the conference, including its sessions, activities, and the implementation of agreed programs. And UNEP, as the secretariat, manages its trust fund, as I mentioned already, to ensure transparent and effective use of resources in line with AMCEN's mandate. And on the Omnibus Decision 1, for example, from the AMCEN-20 session, we have the sub-decision on strengthening the rules of procedure of AMCEN, and the minister decided to maintain the existing rules of procedure and request the AMCEN Secretariat to consult with member states with a view to identify areas requiring revision by AMCEN-21. So how are the decisions made at AMCEN? Because we also attended the negotiations there. So it follows a preference for consensus, which reflects the collaborative and solidarity nature of AMCEN's mandate. When consensus, of course, is not reached, decision might take by 2/3 majority vote of the member states present and voting as well. So now you are wondering, so we have 2 days for the expert session and then 2 days for the ministers. So how about the non-state actors like NGOs, civil societies, and IPSC, young people? So non-state actors also organize through regional consultative meeting of the UNEP major groups and stakeholders in Africa. So we have 4 days prior to the AMCEN-20. We had one at from 11 to 10 to 11 July at the World Agroforestry Center, and then 12 to 13 July at UNON, the United Nations office in Nairobi, before the conference. And of course, in addition to the minister, the government officials, the UN, and intergovernmental organization officials, AMCEN actively engages with civil society, youth, indigenous peoples, women, farmers, workers, researchers, private sector, who participate under the African major groups and stakeholders. Or MGS, and this is for an inclusive and representative decision making. So during the 4 days, over 150 representatives of African civil society organizations and the different stakeholders I mentioned from all the 5 sub-regions of Africa worked through 6 thematic groups on AMCEN-40. For thematic groups, you have the thematic group on AMCEN-40 and priorities for the period of 2025 to 2027 and beyond. We also have a thematic group on UNIA 7, on biodiversity, CMS or Convention of Migratory Species, CITES, Convention of Wetlands. So that is for biodiversity focused thematic groups We also had a thematic group on Minamata Convention of Mercury, Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, and last but not least, the thematic group on climate change is the African ministers are preparing for the UNFCCC COP30. So from these thematic groups, the member of the African Civil Society organization there delivered key messages, summary statement, and long statement to the African experts and ministers, and it provides a legitimate avenue to influence outcomes and ensures inclusive and representative decision making. So we, as fellows, we also participated at the regional consultative meeting. I was a rapporteur for the biodiversity-related conventions. So it has the CBD, the CMS, the Convention of Wetlands, and CITES. And apart from that, we also had a presentation on the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, Convention on Migratory Species, the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species for Fauna and Flora, or CITES. I will share the link to my presentation in the description as well if you're interested. And it happened at the World Agroforestry Center, or ICRAF, in Kenya on July 10th, and it was the inaugural Youth Day. So it was the first ever Youth Day at the regional consultative meeting. And during my presentation with the other fellows, we shared about these conventions first, having some overview on when it was created, on what is it about, and we also outlined key youth priorities to allow young voices to be directly heard within the high-level regional discussions during AMCEN, and to emphasize the critical role of youth in shaping Africa's environmental future. So now that you understand a little bit more about AMCEN, the rules of procedures, the structure, as well as how can non-state actors participate outside of the experts and the ministers, we have some outcomes. So at AMCEN-20, the technical segment agreed on 11 decisions and the Tripoli Declaration. So the Tripoli Declaration was on the environmental action in Africa. And it was adopted by the ministerial segment. So the 11 decisions was adopted. So I'm going to share briefly about decisions, but I'll share the link below in the descriptions if you are interested. So first of all, we have the first decision, which was about the omnibus decision on integrated environmental governance and strategic cooperation in Africa. So if I summarize it, it recognizes the need for solution-oriented action on environmental sustainability and also the prosperity in Africa, and it contains 6 sub-decisions. So the decision 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 11 were adopted without amendment. However, the decision 4 and 10 were adopted, but with some amendment that I will mention. So we discussed about the decision 1 of AMCEN-20. The decision 2 was about the ocean governance in Africa. Decision 3 was about strengthening chemicals and waste governance. Decision 5 on Africa's participation at CITES COP20. The decision 6 on Africa's participation at Ramsar COP15 that just happened in July as well. The decision 8 was on climate change. The decision 9 on Africa's engagement at UNEA 7 later in December. And the decision 11 on draft protocol under the UNCCD in those countries experiencing serious drought and or desertification, particularly in Africa, and those decisions were adopted without amendment. However, the decision 4 on Africa's priorities for 2025 and 2027 was adopted with an amendment, as the DRC suggested, and delegates agreed to establish an ad hoc committee to examine the classification for the massive destruction of environmental ecosystems during the period of 2025 and 2027. And the other decision, the decision 10 on biodiversity, was also adopted with an amendment, as the DRC again proposed to include armed conflict as a driver of biodiversity loss. So those are the 11 decisions at AMCEN-20. The next ordinary session of AMCEN, so the AMCEN-21, will occur jointly with the 58th session of the Conference of African Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. And the delegates agreed that the AMCEN Secretariat and the UNEP, in consultation with both conference bureaux, to determine the date and the venue of AMCEN-21. So those are the 11 decisions, but concretely, what do these decisions mean for Africa's future in the context of this convention? So AMCEN, as a brief background, shaped pivotal regional environmental agreements and initiatives. It includes the Bamako Convention, for example, on hazardous wastes, and the Great Green Wall Initiative under the UNCCT. And the 11th decision will further enable the 54 countries, the African countries, to work together on regional solutions and present a unified front in international forums that I previously mentioned. And we know that Africa faces urgent environmental threats in climate change, inland degradation, biodiversity loss, pollution, and those directly impact health, food security, and economic growth. So by the African countries having common positions when it comes to this conference of parties, we believe that the next chapter will be bold and transformative and continue to align with Agenda 2063 and 2030 for sustainable development. So yeah, that was mostly it about AMCEN. So let me now share about the skills that I've acquired from these conferences. So honestly, apart from seeing how the sessions were or how the ministers are negotiating, or the experts, I've also learned a lot about negotiation techniques, and I understand how the consensus building process is happening outside of the fact that we learned about it during our workshops, and also understood the creation of ad hoc committees, like what happened with that AMCEN decision 4 on the creation of ad hoc to examine the classification for the massive destruction of environmental ecosystem by DRC, for example. Apart from that, I also had the opportunity to engage in leadership dialogues with negotiators, with the chair of African Group of Negotiators on Wetlands or Wildlife. It was Prof. Patience, and also the chair of Africa Group of Negotiators on Biodiversity. It was Mr. Kassé. And of course, also meeting the outgoing Executive Secretary of UNCCT, Mr. Ibrahim Chow. And AMCEN-20 was his last official world conference. And honestly, these exchanges really enriched my perspective on environmental governance and strengthened my negotiation skills. I've also learned a lot from the experiences of these leaders. So, about the AWF-Wall Policy Fellowship, Honestly, the hybrid pre-conference workshops organized by AWF and UNEP experts provided hands-on trainings and experience that helped us become familiar with the specialized terminology, the processes, expectations, because as I mentioned, I was one of the rapporteurs during the regional consultative meeting on the biodiversity conventions, which include CITES, Ramsar, CMS. So it helped a lot. As I told you, it's a 9-month hybrid program. So it helped a lot to learn first online and in person before attending this important conference. And especially the in-person workshop on the simulation of COP16 negotiations offered practical insights into how the negotiations are and what the strategy are. We understood about working groups and contact groups happening at the same time to negotiate on specific agenda item. And I think that was mostly it. I've shared about the AWF, the African Wildlife Foundation, the AWF-Wall Policy Fellowship, and as well as AMCEN in general and my experience. So feel free to add in the comments what your thoughts are. If you'd like me to do another episode on the specific decisions that you're interested in, or if you would like to be part of the future policy fellowship program by AWF. But honestly, for me, the program really exceeded my expectations, because before and during the conference, the AWF team, the youth team, and the broader team was really supportive. We had daily debrief during the AMCEN sessions as well to understand our priorities for the day and to have some feedback from the sessions that were happening the day before. And it really enhanced the learning experience, and also the fact that we could meet incredible leaders in the environmental field was just amazing. So that's it for today. Please follow us on YouTube as well as on Spotify to hear more about international environmental biodiversity, international environment governance, or any if you'd like to take it to focus on biodiversity. Thank you so much.